I've been asked earlier today not to mention his name, and I'm not going to, because I think that's good. I think that's quite right. Why would we give him the honour of naming him? And in fact, you know what? You put a picture up of him. Let's get rid of that. Let's not even put his picture anymore in front of the people. It's a horrible picture. He looks demented. He looks deranged. I think it's better if we don't even see that picture anymore. You know, let's consign him to the dustbin of history, and let's hope we never hear from him or his representatives ever again. Let's talk to Chris Daw, KC, a barrister, a writer, a broadcaster, a thoughtful individual, one of my favourite lawyers, I think, partly because we normally disagree about pretty much everything. Chris, a very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
Such a horrible story. I mean, I don't know where to begin, really. I'm going to say that that we're doing the right thing. I'm not going to mention his name. I'm not going to see his picture anymore. When I think about those little girls, I mean, I don't know if you've got children, but you know, I've had 4 children, and I can remember my daughter at that age and my sons at that age, and it's so painful to even consider what those people's parents must be going through, their family must be going through. It's so awful. But we must talk about, you know, the failings of the system. We must talk about whether or not the justice that we've seen being done has been done, whether we can change anything. I'm not even sure what I want in this case, you know. I mean, I said yesterday I wanted him to be sentenced to a whole life sentence, and I thought that it would be good if the Prime Minister could have said, let's make an exception and not treat him as a juvenile. I don't know what you think about that. Tell us.
Well, that's not legally possible. You can't change the law after the event. It's called retrospectivity, and it's not allowed. You can only be sentenced according to the law of the land at the time that you were committed the crime, and so that's just a basic principle which applies to everyone. That you. But
isn't everything changeable though, Chris? I mean, the point about the law surely is that the law is a movable feast, and I've made this point before that, you know. I appreciate that people like you will never want the politicians to interfere in the process, because that would be possibly a bad precedent to set. But surely there must be exceptions that can be made, no?
Well, you don't need them, because the truth is that I'm not really sure why there is so much focus on the difference between 52 years as a minimum, remember, in prison, and there's absolutely no guarantee whatsoever that he would be released age 70, and indeed the judge was of the view that was unlikely when he sentenced yesterday. So the reality is that you're kind of splitting hairs between 52 years or maybe 62 or 67. Really, once you get to that many years into the future, I for an 18-year-old, I really don't think it makes any significant difference. And for me, at the beginning of when you introduced this piece, you said, well, I don't really know what to say about this, and I don't really know how to feel about this. And obviously that's rare for you, but it's also rare for me, because my genuine view is that the only thing that matters is the memory of those beautiful children that we've seen so many times, who were taken away from their families and whose future was extinguished. And I think the only thing that matters to me is how we learn lessons to make sure that if we can, we avoid other families.
Absolutely. Listen, yeah, and I'm very conscious of not wanting to make a kind of political point, or, you know, just to make radio or television shows, you know, you say things that, you know, might inflame other people. I'm really conscious of that, and I don't want to do that. But I do think that people are concerned, because one comment that I heard yesterday, and I think it was somebody made it on Times Radio, is that, you know, there will be people who are not yet born who might end up on a parole board in about 40 years' time, who might say at some point or other, this guy can be released because now he's okay, albeit 52 years down the road, you know. And I know that that's a long way off, and I know that you say it doesn't really matter, but it's sort of, can you not show that picture, please? I don't want to see it. Get rid of it. I don't want to see it. You know what I mean? You know, there are still possibilities that could happen. I mean, when we look at, for example, the Nottingham story, and this is why people were concerned, Valdo Calacane, you know, the killer of 2 beautiful young students and an elderly man, he's going to be possibly available to be released, because somebody will, psychiatrist-wise or otherwise, will say he's fine and now he can come out. And I think, you know, most people, I think, quite rightly will say that this character should never be released. And at the moment, because of the way that he was sentenced, albeit he's been sentenced for a long time, he could still technically come out of jail.
Yeah, I know, but I don't see why that's so much of a focus, because Almost every murderer, with the exception of about 60 or so in the system, almost all of them will come out one day, whether they're child murderers, whether they're murderers of adults. And that's a conversation as a society that we can have as to whether we want to have life without parole or whole life sentences for hundreds or thousands of killers, which it would be the situation that they have in the United States, where they have thousands and tens of thousands of people serving life without the possibility of parole or a whole life sentence. If we want to go that way, yes, but my preference would be that we focus on learning lessons. Let's see what we can learn from someone like this and his history, because the only value that we have from this terrible tragedy is lessons that we learn for the future. Looking backwards, looking to sort of just feel better about ourselves or to have some sense of vengeance, I don't think that helps the next generation of children.
See, I'm not talking from a sense of vengeance. I just think that there are some people, and he is one, and they're a very small number of people, not very many. You know, in your career and mine, you could probably count them on one hand, certainly on two hands, the kind of evil that he perpetrated on the world. And I don't think society would be worse off if we made a decision to say that, look, in certain circumstances, people who are this awful and this evil should never be released. And I don't think our justice system would be worse off for that.
But we have made that decision. It's just that we have made that decision.
But not in this case.
That doesn't apply to children when they commit. Right.
But he wasn't a child, was he? He was 17. He was 13 days shy of an 18-year-old's birthday. He's not a child. He's allowed to vote in Wales. In Wales, where he was born, he's allowed to vote. So he's not a child. He's allowed to have sex. He's allowed to join the army. You may not agree with it, but the fact is that he is treated, to all intents and purposes, in Wales as an adult.
But Mike, you just mentioned I have 4 children, you have 4 children, I have two stepchildren as well. My youngest son is 10. We know that under 18s are fundamentally different in their development to over 18s.
Yeah, we do.
And in fact, it's not just 18, because it's not a magic number. The truth is that many individuals don't reach any, I mean, Mike, let's not speak about ourselves, but many individuals don't reach a sense of maturity until they're well into their 20s.
Listen, I didn't mature till I was 56, you know, as I'm told by the mother of my children. The point is, though, that legally speaking, if you are given the right to vote, if you are given the right to join the army, if you're given the right to get married, then surely you should be given the same treatment as an adult if you commit a crime.
Well, I'm not sure where you brought Wales out of the picture from, because he was in Southport, which, as far as I know,
well, he was born in Wales. That's why.
Well, I know, but the events took place in England, so I don't know.
Well, I mean, let's put it this way: the fact when the horrible events happened, we were told, because the government didn't want us to think that he might be a migrant of any kind, we were told he was Welsh, born in Wales, and was a choir boy. So
I know, but that's all publicity, and again, I don't. You know, we all know the background, right? We know that following these awful events, and I'm really glad, by the way, that you've rightly put the pictures of these children on the screen so that we can all focus and remember what this is really about. But you are right that, sadly, following on from these tragic murders, society decided to explode, and we had all of these riots where huge amounts of damage, injuries and so forth were caused. And that does come back to politicians and commentators and journalists and social media posters, you know, deliberately inflaming the situation instead of standing back and looking to pay tribute to the children, to pay calm tribute to their lives. People went out on the streets and started smashing things up.
Yeah, but you know why that happens, Chris? Is because people get sick to death of paying tribute to children and victims. You know, after a while they say enough is enough. You know, there's a problem here and we need it to be fixed. And it doesn't help when the government and Keir Starmer, who has himself admitted that he withheld information that he could have given us, people get angry about that. I don't condone what they did. I certainly didn't encourage them to do it, but I can understand why people got angry.
Of course, everyone can understand why people got angry, but it's not for the Prime Minister to release information about ongoing criminal investigation to the public, because
actually, Michael Mansfield, who's a very estimable barrister, as I'm sure you'd agree, agrees with me that Starmer would have been better off if he'd released a bit more information than he did.
it wasn't for the Prime Minister to release that information because, as you said earlier, Mike, the problem is it's all very well saying politicians should tell us or give us a commentary or explanation about a live criminal investigation, but we won't like that when they do it about something we disagree with them about. Well, the minute that politicians start to become involved in live criminal investigations where the police are trying to get witnesses, the police are trying
but they have before.
Down the evidence.
But they have before. That's why people are so upset about the inconsistency. You know, Keir Starmer and other politicians who are of both stripes, you know, I'm not in any way, party political about this. You know, when Joe Cox's murderer was arrested, he was immediately called a terrorist. There was no question about it. There was no worry that that was going to somehow prejudice his trial. You know, this was a different case because they were worried genuinely that there would be a bad reaction if people found out where this guy was from.
Well, you say found out where he was from. The problem, if you remember, was actually that on social media it was false information.
Yeah,
about
exactly right. Yeah, and the reason
that led to an awful lot of reaction.
And that false information was allowed to exist partially because the real information wasn't given out. And if they'd given out the real information, I'm a great believer in shining a light as a disinfectant on conspiracy theories, on nonsense, on the kind of crap that we all see every single day. I mean, they're still putting it around about this connection between Keir Starmer and the parents of this guy, you know, which is completely wrong. It's an incorrect story. And it hasn't, because it hasn't been officially denied, people will still feed it around, and you know, I find that to be a problem.
Well, can I just say this as a general point, and sort of diverted from this case just slightly, which is that the communication by this government, and indeed the previous government, but the communication by this government about almost everything has been so unclear.
Yeah.
Does anyone actually know what their policies are about anything? Well, this is the problem, Mike. So this is not just about this case. We can pick on one case and say Keir Starmer, as a former prosecutor, should have known or released more information. The truth be told is we don't know what this government's doing about anything.
No,
I have
true.
no idea what the plan is.
Yeah, but the business of crime is meant to be his speciality. I mean, he was the head of the CPS, for heaven's sake. You know, he keeps reminding us that he was the man that prosecuted the grooming gangs. Well, you know, it's absolute crap, I'm afraid.
I agree. Listen, Mike, I agree with you. It is absolute crap. What we're getting from this government day after day is confusion, misinformation, lack of joined-up thinking. Yeah. And what we need is a Prime Minister, whoever that may be, and sadly I don't think it's Keir Starmer, but whoever it is, who can come out on the steps of Number 10 when major events happen and take the public with them.
Yeah.
Get the public to fully appreciate and understand all of the moving parts. You have to have a Prime Minister who can say, here are some facts, and they do that in consultation with lead investigators who have to have primacy. You can't take primacy away from the police investigators who have a very, very clear strategy for gathering evidence, for gathering information. They're very clear about what the law allows them to do and not do.
Exactly.
Once politicians blunder into that, that's when things go wrong.
But again, you know, and we know that Merseyside Police wanted to release more information, but they were told not to by the CPS. And I worry that the CPS has been politicised. I worry that Keir Starmer, who supposedly is the guy that knows everything there is to know about the law, is either a very bad lawyer or he's withholding something for a different reason. And that's what I want to know about.
I think the problem is that you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. If Keir Starmer had stepped into the case and had started releasing information which he'd received in confidential briefings as Prime Minister, it entirely drives a coach and horses through the separation of the criminal justice system and the political system. Yeah. They are not supposed to join up.
Well then let me throw this at you. Angela Rayner said in July, anyone who spreads the story that this is an act of terrorism is spreading fake news and is a conspiracy theorist. It now turns out that that was actually wrong, and she shouldn't have said that either.
It didn't turn out it was wrong. The judge specifically said that it wasn't terrorist related.
Keir Starmer in his speech the other day more or less admitted that it was a terrorist incident, but he couldn't be called that because of some ridiculous personality, definition of the word terrorism. I've had this conversation with people all week. You know, again, Michael Mansfield agreed with me. Everybody knows what a terrorist is, right? You don't have to, define it. And this is the problem when you get too many lawyers involved in too much of actual reality and realpolitik, is that they're all about definitions. Well, I know he's a terrorist. You know he's a terrorist. The fact that he can't be called a terrorist because somebody says he doesn't have an ideology, is complete rubbish. And whether
Well, no one's saying you can't call him a terrorist. It's just that anyone, the members of the public, your listeners and viewers, can call anyone everything they want. The difference is that a High Court judge, and I hope everybody has seen the High Court judge and the way that he dealt with that sentencing hearing yesterday, incredibly compassionate towards the family, incredibly calm and rational, and very much not taking any nonsense when the defendant was kicking off in the courtroom, etc. The judge maintained control and dignity, and he gave the families the opportunity to make their voices heard, to make their victim impact statements in whatever form they wanted. And the process that followed in that courtroom, without the defendant present because of his behaviour, but the process that followed was one that I think does credit to our lawyers and our...
Yes, I agree with that.
And I think anyone who's been watching any of these high-profile cases and the judges' sentencing in the last year or two, since it's been allowed, will agree that the judges are doing a good job of communicating what the public and what the families feel about these cases. And the judge, of course, has to follow the law. We can't have a situation where a judge in an individual case decides to rip up whatever the law says because it doesn't quite suit the narrative of the media or public anger at any one time. That's exactly what courts are there to avoid. They are there to apply the law faithfully, and if anyone
but again, Chris, you know as well as I do, and you're absolutely, I agree with everything you're saying, but I also know, as you do, that the law is a movable feast, and that, you know, the law can change. The law can be changed and changed either by statute or by case law or by whatever happens, you know, and so it's constantly moving. So it's never static, right? And what we, I think, have now all learned and agreed is that, you know, to have such a tight and kind of straight-jacketed definition of something isn't necessarily the way forward. And maybe we shouldn't be so hung up on the word. Maybe there's something to be said for that. But, you know, Prime Minister Keir Starmer himself said on Tuesday when he made his speech, terrorism has changed. He said Britain faces a new threat. I don't agree with him. I think the lone wolf scenario has been with us for a very much longer time than he would care to tell us. But at the end of the day, you know, this bloke's a terrorist. He admitted to, pleaded guilty to a terrorist offence. He was charged with a terrorist offence. How is he not a terrorist?
Well, he's a terrorist by the definition of anyone who wants to call him that. The problem, Mike, as you say, is that labels don't really get you anywhere. You know, so what? Why are we arguing about the terminology here? What we should be arguing about is why was a 12-year-old child ringing Childline saying, I'm going to kill or I want to kill another child?
Yeah.
Why was that happening? And why didn't someone intervene when he was 12?
Right.
Because 5 years later, he goes on to commit these terrible murders. And to me, there's the real sort of question that we need to be asking is how someone can raise that many alarm bells and still go on to commit crimes like this.
Yeah.
That, for me, is where we should focus every bit of our attention, because as a father of children and as a member of our society who doesn't want to see a single child, whoever's child they are, harmed in any way, shape or form, what I care about is protection of our children for the future and proper and solemn memorial for those children who tragically died to support their families. Let's not get into a tit for tat about language. Let's focus on child protection, because that's what our society so badly fails to achieve time after time after time.
Sure.